Well, good morning, everybody. I wanted to start you off today with a radar animation here that is over Dodge City, Kansas. This is the Dodge City, Kansas radar here. And I've got this in a mode that's going to show you a lot of clear air echo so we can see one very unique feature about this massive supercell. This is the second time in as many days that we've seen a storm system like this going through this part of Kansas, north to south. And the supercell is here, and you can very clearly see the hook echo. I'll get the cursor off there so you can watch it again on the western side of the storm as it moved toward the south. You can also see the very high reflectivity. See the pink in there? That's where we get down here into these high rate of reflectivity values above 60, which is a distinct color break on the bar to let us know where there's the possibility of hail. You can also see a couple of other non-meteorological features like the wind turbines, which you can see all lined up in rows here. That's the high echoes off of the very bright echoes, I should say, off of the top of the turbine blades. You can also see a lot of the clear air echo that's getting really pulled into the circulation of this storm. And what I want to show you here is the outflow from this storm. Part of this is the rear flank of the storm. It's kind of riding through its rear flank, feeding into the moisture on the south. I mean, this is the moisture that's feeding it. This is the drier and cooler air on the back side. And I got to be honest, I'm going to save this animation because this is textbook quality view of just the flow around one of these very, very powerful storms. Now, it stole the show when you look at the satellite data as well. Let me just blow this up so we can see it. What you've got here is some, this morning, storms continuing to go into this area. You can also see a lot of the wildfire smoke still pulled, this time all the way down into the southeast. I made it down here earlier in this week. I wasn't quite clear enough in the forecast to see that it was going to make it down this far, but it did. But last night, just to show you this storm system again, watch it explode right here. Now, this is not to take away from some of the other very large storms that were in parts of Missouri over here in Indiana, many of these producing a tremendous amount of lightning, hail, and very, very heavy rains. And we also had storms popping on the mountains in Arizona, New Mexico. A little bit different orientation. We got a new update there, sorry. A little bit different orientation on the flow than we typically get from the monsoon, but still some large storms here as well. We can even see, if we kind of look closely, some of the wildfire smoke that is in parts of California as well. But this is just kind of a view of what the atmosphere has been up to. And if you've noticed, it's been one of those things that each morning we get this picture, this idea of where we think the severe weather is going to be, but because of just the highly localized nature of storm development like this, they can sometimes fall outside of our, early morning, warning areas where we're looking for the regions that we're trying to keep you aware of. So what about the hail? When looking through the last 24 hours at maximum estimated hail size, again, several of these storms in Indiana and Missouri into Kansas, and also take a look again, Nebraska getting kind of ripped through here with numerous storms producing hail. The one I showed you, though, closely was right in through here producing baseball-size hail. Storm Prediction Center looking at total number of reports, 304 reports, but we had 36 of our hail reports that were larger than 2 inches, and they're denoted on this graphic with a triangle. Let's look at it another way, just total precipitation here, and this is what the last 72 hours have done. So we just kind of look at the storm systems from late in the weekend here through early Tuesday morning at how heavy the rainfall has been, and I want to dissect this map a couple of ways. First of all, I want to take away everything less than half of an inch. We've done this repeatedly throughout this spring, but this just kind of identifies those places that got the drink of water that was needed, the kind that can stick around for more than just a day. And we can now start to identify those really heavy rainfall areas. And then I want to back the time up a bit. I want to look over the last 30 days. And so here's our latest 30-day precipitation anomaly map. Now, we've covered the large storms that have been throughout the plains, down across the lower Mississippi River Valley, and then up the East Coast, where lately we've seen some pretty heavy rainfall coming out of Virginia and then getting up here into New England. I got to talk last night with my good friend Dr. Dave Cole about some of the precipitation he's seen here and some of the trouble is it's caused with cutting hay and getting operations done. And that's not just in Virginia, that's elsewhere. But I'm still trying to identify those very dry spots. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take off everything that's greater than 50%. So in a 30-day span of time, who's not seen, at least half of their normal rainfall? And now we begin to see those pockets here throughout the Pacific Northwest. We get to see the Southwest and how very dry and how hot it has been in this area. You'll see that in a few moments. But take a look at a large section of eastern Texas, central Texas. We have our pockets throughout Missouri, getting right over here to where the Ohio and the Mississippi River come together. And then throughout parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin, getting up to the parts of North Dakota, and then as I showed yesterday, into the Canadian prairie. These are areas that have been quite dry. So we're going to look to see if this upcoming pattern as we watch this larger ridge just kind of open itself up here. Can we get the ridge riding storms into these areas? Can we continue to sustain these areas that need it with rain? What about bringing in some moisture into Texas with this pattern as well? So here is today's outlook from this SPC. So certainly a lot different than the look we had yesterday. There's a frontal boundary slicing through North Dakota. We still have the events kind of running over the ridge, including the strong storms we were currently watching on satellite. You just saw them a moment ago. And this is going to be a corridor right in through here that I'm going to have to watch carefully. So from here, we'll go over to day 2. And again, we're going to watch an area as the frontal boundary slices through the midsection of the country, but also parts of the mid-Atlantic down into Virginia and North Carolina. And day 3, this is really starting to set up the intersection here of where our ridge and this frontal boundary are going to kind of collide. So we're going to watch the Ohio River Valley, parts of the Carolinas, and then back here again, Colorado, Kansas, and the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas. The setup for today looks something like this. Let that readjust there for you. Here's the low kind of spinning up here that's going to be bringing that front through that's going to give us the risk of severe storms out ahead of it. But as we mentioned yesterday, we do have some sense of a Bermuda high, and it is helping to pull moisture in, and that's what's coming through Texas and running into a boundary that's still sitting right here. That would be that northern side of our ridge, our bigger ridge in the upper levels that's sitting there. So there's a feed of moisture, and it's going to be this frontal boundary right in through here that we're going to have to keep a very close eye on. Because if you just take a look at the latest high-res NAM data, so let's play this out through the day today, what I'm concerned about is the potential for a damaging squall line to roll through this area. We've seen a few different model runs that suggest that that could occur. And just on a personal note, I could probably add a bit of guarantee to this because I am in St. Louis getting to talk to a great group down here, and I'm supposed to fly out of St. Louis this afternoon, and therefore there's a pretty high probability that that will be coming through just because of my travel plans. You've all probably felt that way in the past. So there it is. I got to watch that system carefully. That could do a lot of damage should it roll through and kind of bow out like this. You see larger storm complexes here over the Ohio Valley, storms that are scattered throughout much of the Great Lakes Basin into New England. And again, we're going to watch that front right through there. So this is this afternoon and this evening. And then as we play forward, do you see where the boundary stalls right here? So this is through early morning Wednesday. Again, more complexes of storms rolling through the same regions and through here, according to the high-res NAM. We go out there toward Wednesday evening, and there it is. So I mentioned there's a low in its front and this stalled out boundary to its south. And the monsoonal flow, well, kind of a monsoonal flow around that ridge, popping up storms throughout the Four Corner states. So this is Wednesday into Thursday. And again, you see this corridor in through here getting lit up a few times all the way out here to the end of the middle of the day on Thursday. Remember, at that time, the front will slice through, but storms are expected again in the plain. So this remains a very stormy pattern. So we kind of come down to a map that distills all that down. We're going to watch this corridor very carefully. We're going to watch for the sea breeze to light up storms along the coast. We have the isolated storms, but then I'll show you in a few moments what's going on right here, which would be very important rain that could get into parts of the upper Midwest. But we're going to watch our storm complexes kind of hitting that same area of the plains going forward. As we look at a map like this, we also try to look for those regions that are a bit drier. We want to understand why they're drier. So let's go have a look at that flow. We always do this in every video because the more we get familiar with understanding the flow of the jet stream, you'll understand these precipitation patterns better. So through the middle of this week, there's a shortwave that slips right through here. That's the source of the lift on that low that's going to go over the Great Lakes by the time we get into Thursday. That's the front to the south. It'll sit right here. Here's the ridge that flattens out, giving us that boundary it's going to push against, all right? So as we go from there through Thursday into Friday, we have kind of a pretty familiar recipe here, right? We have this trough of low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, this highly amplified ridge. That's the source of the heat that's going up the west into the Rocky Mountains, and then the downstream trough introducing the cooler air into this region. But beyond this Sunday, we have been paying attention to one very important feature, and that is the ridge and its potential kind of flexing or opening a bit farther to the north. Because what happens out here around the 25th of July is if you follow the tightest contours, that will tell you where the jet stream's going to be. It's going to stay pretty far to the north. We will get storms, likely, that will cascade over the top of this. Here we are next week. But as this ridge opens, it's going to take heat with it back throughout the plains, back throughout the upper Midwest, back throughout the northern plains into the Canadian prairie. And our last holdout for cooler weather will be over here in the east. But it appears that that ridge, as it opens, sending the jet farther to the north, is going to keep a broader area toward the finish of this month with some warmer temperatures. Now, we've seen the models fake us out on this several times. They keep trying to open up this ridge, and what ends up happening is the trough that's been over Greenland and the Hudson Bay, kind of this area, keeps getting deeper with every new forecast. We've now not seen that in the most recent updates. So let's take a look at what that's going to mean in terms of precipitation. And I want to show you, let me take you back here, what the European model's solution is. So you looked at the WPC. Let's go have a look at the European. So does it have that same corridor getting hit multiple times right in through here? It does. But it also has complexes of storms following the front, coming out of parts of the dry parts of the Canadian Prairie into the upper Midwest and Great Lakes. You can see the heavy rains that are expected in New England out of this as well. But for most of the next 7 days, there's going to be a corridor in through here and to the south of this that is going to be dry, save the isolated storms. And I should have drawn that back farther to the west here through Montana. Now, that's not to ignore the dryness that's in the west, but this is much more common with these large ridges in the west. But then you're going to see early next week, Monday, Tuesday, getting into Wednesday, that there is going to be a pulse, a push midweek next week that could start to deliver storms over the top of this. And that's when that ridge is really opening up, starting to push in some heat. So let's take this and look at it a different way. This is now the operational European run, but we're looking at the precipitation anomalies over the next 7 days. So do notice outside of the Gulf Coast region, we're drier in the interior of the southeast, we're drier in Texas. This is our stormy corridor right in through here where that boundary lives. Also, we see a drier region, much of the Corn Belt having a drier go of it over the next 10 days or so. But we need to be paying attention to any storm system that could cascade over the top of those ridges I kept pointing out. So we'll look at this as well in terms of probabilities. I love these maps, show them every time. I really feel as though they capture the essence of these summertime forecasts. 10-day probability of getting at least an inch. We see the corridors we're watching carefully. Heaviest rains here. And we're going to watch to see if these storms that come over the top of this ridge can, in fact, get into the drier spots here. I don't have a lot of hope for Texas in this case. I don't have a lot of hope for big storms rolling throughout, the whole of the desert Southwest. It's not a full setup for a monsoon yet. But when you look at this, those are the factors that we're going to try to pay close attention to. Now, as we get out there toward the end of July, we keep asking this question. All right, yes, the ridge opens, but is there moisture out ahead of it? Is something feeding moisture in? And the models keep wanting to give us a hint that they're going to open the Gulf up, which means if you build a ridge here, and it's flexing north, and there's a lot of heat in it, but you've got moisture out ahead of it, storms will be initiated, and they'll run through this. So when we look out there and see these drier forecasts into week 2, like the CPC just released this one yesterday, we start to get concerned about how long is this drier air going to be here. I'm sure they agree with me that there will be storms that will cascade through this pattern and possibly bring in some relief at times, because there's going to be some warmer air that's going to get in there at the end of this month into early August as well. Wettest conditions, they still have them from New England, and they've actually got a bit more activity happening down here in Southern California. And this is a bit of an interesting look right in through here, because I've made a case that I don't think it's going to be overly wet in this area because of the persistence of the ridge. But I think what they're seeing is if that ridge moves just a little bit in this direction, you bring the flow around, you can introduce some of that Pacific air, some of that air coming off of Mexico to possibly introduce some storms. So I'm not going to discount what they said, not even close. But we got this from the European model just as a complement to it. So you see they've got near normal, moisture here, but they did back off on the dryness in this area in the week 2 forecast. So it's still a drier look with only isolated storm events. So what are the temperatures going to do? Let's go straight to the National Digital Forecast Database. Another scorcher, still have the heat advisories and excessive heat watches and warnings out for this area. But you can see where that cooler air is that's come through the midsection of the country. And you can see the second front later this week on Thursday that comes through and knocks out some of the heat. Watch in Illinois and Missouri. There you go into Friday as that cooler air comes in. Now remember, it's after this week, getting into the weekend, that the ridge that's been throughout the west opens. So take a look. This is now getting out there to into Sunday and into Monday. And this is where we begin to introduce those mid-90s into this area. Now, we've not had a lot of heat stress, and I'll show you tomorrow the latest update on the stress degree day map, just so we can see it. but this is going to start to add in some of those days here, and it's going to get hot. Now we want to know, is it still showing up in the ensembles? Because for the next 5 days, we don't have that heat stress. As we play this out there, though, and stop it at day 5 through 10, that's when the ridge is expected to open and pour in some of that heat into this area. And the model wants to keep it there. This is all the way out there to the end of July and the very first day of August. And we did get an update from the Climate Prediction Center that now they've put out a moderate risk of excessive heat for the last 5 or 6 days of July in this area. Now, can the flow pull storms through here during that time? I think it will. They will be highly local. They'll pop like the ones I've been telling you about in Kansas, but it's not as though it's going to be completely bone dry everywhere in this region. Now, we always ask, how long does the pattern possibly stay like this? And the newest European weeklies for the whole of the month of August were released last night, and they've got this set up. They've got a drier signal for a large part of the country, not dry, but drier. And we have to call this into question for a couple of reasons. If the ridge keeps retreating to the west, then they don't have this dry enough, and they are not picking up on the storms that will rip through the midsection here of the country. Secondly, this has no indication of any sort of tropical activity that could get into this area in the month of August and really start to deliver rain here, because this model is incapable of doing that. But they're suggesting that the persistence in the pattern with the ridge and its opening up farther to the north is going to make it a bit drier on the downstream side of it. And they're also suggesting that much of August is going to be hot for much of the country. So we need to keep an eye on this carefully and watch the position of that ridge. The last thing I want to tell you about today is what's going on in the tropics. They've now reclassified Don as a tropical storm. It's right here. This is the forecast track of Don, swirling around and making its way back into the North Atlantic. But again, we have another set of runs where the European model is attempting to kick something off down here in the main development region throughout the Atlantic. Now, this is not yet being reflected in the updates from the National Hurricane Center. So in other words, there's not a kind of a watch area out here, but we just need to be aware that this is going on right now. But what's probably suppressing some of that activity is just a look here at a forecast of dust coming off of the Sahara Desert. This runs out there about 10 days and just shows you that we've got a pretty active kind of monsoonal flow between the Sahel and the desert down here, the rainforest to the south. And that's just pushing a lot of Saharan dust across the open Atlantic. And much of it's getting to the Caribbean. And we expect by the time we get into the end of this month, it'll settle into the south. So watch that again. You're going to see that plume of dust. This is Saharan dust coming across the Caribbean and then getting into the Gulf and making its way eventually into the south. So we need to be aware of what this is going to do to our air quality. And finally, speaking of air quality, I want to bring up the latest loop of vertically integrated smoke throughout the rest of today. And again, our wildfires in the west, the smoke that's being pulled into that low, curling through parts of Saskatchewan, that's the one that's bringing the front through. And then the smoke that earlier this week was in the Midwest, now rolling through the eastern side of the country. So a lot of moving pieces with this pattern, and we're going to watch that ridge kind of open itself up and start to really work on determining where it's going to go and what it's going to do next. So I look forward to keeping you updated on that stuff, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks.